I got into the rug business accidentally. I was a school teacher and was interested in Persian architecture. For some reason, I stumbled onto a book of Persian architecture in a bookstore in Berkeley, California, where I lived, and I could not believe the appeal of these books. It was the sort of thing where I wanted, a friend would come and visit, and I would open this book and insist that they look at these pictures and expect them to feel what I did. It took me a while to realize, it just doesn't quite work that way. Something had hit me which wasn't going to hit them. So I had a summer vacation. I went to Iran. I had kind of a destination of going to Shiraz. Bought a car in Europe, traveled across Europe and Turkey. I'm not sure. I don't know if I was aware at the time that you might just fly to Tehran and save yourself a lot of trouble. But in any case, drove hither and yon and finally made my way down to Shiraz. And it was a little bit like there was a string connecting me to a man who dealt in the bazaar there. I bought a number of things from him. I bought things in Tehran. I bought things in Hamadan. All very interesting. I didn't know much, and so it was mostly about price. Usually not paying over $35 for things. Got back to the United States. And the point here is, decorated my apartment with all of these objects, and then a few months later it was robbed, and the thieves were interested only in the Oriental rugs and the trappings and the bags and all of the kind of tribal stuff that already fascinated me deeply. They took every thread of it, and this was the luckiest thing that ever happened to me. I wrote to this dealer in Shiraz. I wrote in English. I don't write Persian, and I speak very, very little Persian. Enough to bargain and get fed and so forth. His prices were really good. There was hardly any bargaining with him, and no need for it. And so I wrote to him and had photos of the things that I'd lost. And I said, here are all these things that I bought, many of them from you, and now they're all gone. And I wonder if there's some way at this distance we can experiment and see if maybe you could, send me some photos or do something, and we could work it out, and I can begin to get some rugs, because I won't be able to come back to Iran for quite a while. His response was to send me, I don't know, 4 or 5 packages of rugs in what I came to call a guni, no doubt related to the word gunny sacks. These were flour sacks, and he knew exactly how many kilos you could get into one of these and have the postal service in Iran accept it. 20 kilos. And he could pack these things very tightly and securely. So these packages arrived in sewn-up cloth, and there's a note in there. There's a letter in one of them in Farsi. I hadn't sent him any money, and so what's this about? A friend said, there's a bunch of Iranian students. The Shah sends all kinds of students to the U.S. They have a place called Iran House. He gave me the address, and so I went to Iran House and knocked on the door, and a bearded man came to the door and viewing me very suspiciously and wanted to know what I wanted. And I said I had a letter from a man in Shiraz, and I needed to get it translated. And so he stepped outside and he scanned this letter, and he said, well, you're a capitalist. You're exploiting rural workers. You're taking advantage of peasants. And about that I don't really have an answer, but I had a $5 bill in my hand. I need to get this translated. He took the $5 and translated. And what it said basically was from this man, this Haji in Shiraz. And Haji's suggestion was that I should sell these things. I should keep the ones that I like the most, sell all the rest, make money, pay for the ones that I kept, and that way I would make good on this theft that I suffered, or at least part of it, and maybe then we could do some more business. And that's what happened. So until I went to Shiraz again, I was still teaching school, but until I went, periodically these packages would arrive through the mail, always, I'm sure, weighing very close to 20 kilos exactly, and we started to do business. I had no idea what I was selling in almost all instances. At that time, it wasn't like, 18th or 19th century rugs were just all over the place, but the tribal accoutrements, the saddlebags, the bands that they used to tie loads on animals, there was a standard price of $10 each for those. The things were so inexpensive. I bought, and then as soon as I could, I went to Shiraz and made a beeline for him. And we started a pattern then that existed all throughout the 70s. I would go to him first and give him, you might say, the first crack at my money. Anything that I could buy from him, I did. There was virtually no bargaining, maybe a little bit sometimes, but it wasn't necessary, and it wasn't about that. And then he would take me around the bazaar, and we would go to a whole bunch of dealers. He would skip some, but he had a route of dealers that we made year after year. And I did write about this in my first book, and I think I more or less did justice to this experience. He was an extraordinary bargainer. He didn't bargain when he sold, but when he went out to buy on my behalf, he bargained. And he would fight over the smallest sums. He would fight over 50 cents. And fight. Just yelling, and he's pulling this rug in, and the guy's holding back, and you're writing numbers at the price on a tag, and the guy's coming and tearing the tag off, and throwing the tag down, and yelling, and Haji would periodically look around. He would sort of come out of a hypnotic state that is part of bargaining, I think, and he would say in Persian, this Yekhane Divane As, this is a crazy house. But he would sometimes say it in a restaurant or other places. He kind of viewed life on Earth as a sort of crazy house. And but he was a point of stability in the middle of the whole thing, and obviously somebody who I grew close to and loved. One more story. After a couple of years, he engaged a translator. He was just frustrated with our inability to communicate about nuances, and I was probably getting in the way of his bargaining skills at times. I understood something about bargaining myself, and you couldn't do this if you didn't, but he was a master. So we got a translator. His name was Kashev, and Kashev would then relate in English what the lay of the land was. With this man, you'll just have to let Haji fight him until it's all over. Don't say anything. Don't look too concerned. It'll all come to an end, and you'll get what you want. We developed a signal system. Haji used words. His question was, "Oya mihahi, do you like it? Mihahi." And the answer when he asked me was always no. And I knew little phrases in English to make it a little more convincing. the colors weren't very good for the U.S. or something. Well, he wanted it for him. He would eventually get back to it, and he would say, well, this American doesn't know anything, but that interests me. And so the whole thing was to try to get not to try to get the rug for an impossible price, because you can't, but to get it for the real price, to get it for the wholesale price. They didn't want me to be treated any different than he would allow himself to be treated. But there were occasions when he would have Kachev and I completely stand away, like 70 or 80 yards away. These bazaars have long corridors. And I'm down over there kind of chomping at the bit, wanting to be involved in the deal. And so, I said, well, what's Kachev? What's he, we have our signal system. Why can't we be over there? And he said, leave Haji be. This man is extremely difficult. Haji is making a psychology. So I once had an employee who heard this story several times, probably come and confess to me, Jim, this morning I made a psychology. So it was a fantastic scene. And, the bazaar was just full of tribespeople, buying, selling, all kinds of locals and foreigners. It was amazing, and nothing like that exists there now, and I would say never will again. Is my voice carrying? So. Okay, I'll speak more clearly. I found out, I saw people like Murray Island. I don't know if some of you have heard that name. Murray Island's written some books. He and his brother were in the rug business together. They would bring things back from Afghanistan that sometimes incredible treasures that they would, and the word was that prices were really low in Afghanistan. So in '73, I took my first trip to Afghanistan. It was just a few weeks after the king, the last point of stability in that country, was deposed by his brother-in-law. And I didn't know anything. I didn't really know where to go or what prices were, whatever, but you just have to start learning. I remember coming out of the airport, and there's kind of a taxi stand, and opposite was a tank, and a guy sitting up on top of the tank smoking a cigarette. So it looked like Afghanistan was more or less peaceful. And I got myself, I don't know, I have to be careful not to tell too many. At any rate, it was a fantastic scene, and I soon met a man named Noor Shear. Noor Shear was an aristocrat. Haji Rahimpour was a very simple man and was certainly not wealthy. Noor Shear's family had an estate and a fort, and but he was a deeply practicing Muslim, and somehow something clicked between us, and so I got to be we became very close, and he didn't bargain very much. My partner was with me one year, and the way things were, he had a narrow building. It was 4 floors, and there were carpets on all of them. And if you found something you wanted, he was busy all the time. He was buying from Uzbeks or Turkmens out in front. He was selling to foreigners here or there. He was there were rugs pouring his way constantly, and he was buying. There were no prices on anything, of course, and so you'd find something you wanted, and an employee would come by, or maybe his brother-in-law, and you'd say, you know, how much does he want for that? And the answer was always the same. You interested in it? We'll put it up. We'll put it up on the 4th floor with your things. And you talk North Shear, and so you had no idea what they would. So over a period of time, 75, 100 rugs stack up, and the day comes when you're bargaining with North Shear. You go up, and he makes an appointment with you. Okay, after lunch today. His lunch is always sitting on the floor with a whole array of locals and people who just smuggled stuff in across from Kyrgyzstan, or you know, some visiting dignitary or whatever. So you're sitting on the floor, and after lunch we'll go upstairs. So you go up, and one by one you deal with the rugs. And there was some bargaining, and by that time I knew the market pretty well. And we did this for about an hour, and in this case with my partner there, North Shear said at one point, I'm tired. Jim Opie, you name the price, I say yes or no. And well, it's one thing to have someone else say, you know, 600 Afghanis, and you say, okay, or, you know, North Shear, that's hard for me. Can you take 550? It wasn't a huge bargaining between us that they're off against. You know. And where especially where you're going to deal with one person, deal just once, then you know, who knows how high the prices can be. So he's, you know, so Jim Opie, you name the price, I say yes or no. And the same thing kind of reversed. It was not easy, but I did it. And then he turned to my partner. And I think this is what North Shear was actually after. Because he said to my partner, Bill, you know, Jim Opie, he tired. You name price. I say yes or no. And he wasn't able to, let's just say he was unable to do that. And I don't know whether some illusions he had about himself came crashing down, but some illusions that I had about him came crashing down. So, also in Afghanistan, in northern Afghanistan, I dealt with a man who developed he didn't have a verbal system so much as he had hand and foot signals. If I liked something, I was to it was on the floor, I put my left foot on it, and if it was on the wall, I'm leaning against the wall, you know, just sort of leaning. And then he, at some point, gets around to it, and he asks me, these are with people who we don't know, they don't know me, it's a raw bargaining situation. And so then he asked me, do you like this? And I just, of course, say, absolutely not. You know, there's nothing about this that I would like. And what I liked was that over there. And then we would bargain over something that I didn't want. You're very good at bargaining over things you don't want. You're often not very good at bargaining over things you do want. And it's true in love and commerce both. But you know, back to Afghanistan. So this system developed and was practiced over years. But the day came when I applied it with I tried to apply it in Peshawar, Pakistan, with some younger dealers, and it was all very cumbersome, and they didn't get it, and he wasn't really watching, and you have to stand somewhere, and so he thought I was giving signals when I wasn't, and over half the time it just wasn't working. He was trying to buy things from me I didn't want, etc. And then we came to the end of the day, and we went back to a parked car, and I stepped in something soft and disagreeable, and went over and, disgusted, I went over to a little patch of grass and tried to clean off my foot. And as I did so, the two men were laughing at me and pointing, and I said, "What's so funny about this?" And one of them said, "Left foot, left foot." I'll tell you a very funny story that happened to a friend of mine, not mine, not to me. And I never saw the piece involved. He was in the Peace Corps in northern Afghanistan. We were there briefly together once, but before he left the Peace Corps, he wanted to buy a weaving. He'd always wanted to buy a local. He taught school in Myanmar. And he wanted to buy a local piece, and so he went to this dealer, and he found a piece, and it had, it was attractive. Incidentally, it didn't matter to him, but it had a little bit of writing in it, of course, which some pieces do. And as he got involved in bargaining, and that time, in good weather at least, bargaining scenes tend to move out of a store, sometimes out on the street. You have better light, and it's just kind of confining in these dark shops. So he was out there bargaining, and a crowd started to form. And the dealer offered the piece for 600 Afghanis, and he wanted to pay 2, and then the people are laughing, and he doesn't get it. He doesn't see there's nothing funny. I mean, in pre-television Afghanistan, as I experienced myself, bargaining scenes like this were local entertainment. You're watching a local guy deal with this foreigner. You're just going to see what happens. You just watch. And people were leaving the crowd and going and getting friends and coming back and laughing, and my friend couldn't get any of it. He understood Farsi. He could speak it. So eventually he buys the rug for about 350 Afghanis. And so a week later he's going to Kabul. He takes the rug with him and he shows it to a friend of his. And he said, "Is there something about this rug that's funny?" And said, "Well, I don't know. I mean, what happened?" And he told him the whole story. And he said, "Well, you speak Farsi, you speak Dari, Farsi, Dan?" And he said, "Yeah." He said, "You read it, don't you?" And he said, No, I don't read." He said, "Well, there's something written in this rug. You don't know what it is?" And, No, what is it?" He said, "Well, I'll tell you what it is. It says the price of this rug is 150 Afghanis." This goes back to Shiraz. And I never had anything like hotel reservations or even much of a plan. Being kind of impulsive by nature, and my wife doesn't let me travel at all the way that I used to, and I probably am better off for it. But I'd fly into Tehran, and I didn't really care for Tehran. The prices were high there, so I'd take the first plane out to either Isfahan or Shiraz. It was just sort of like, it didn't matter to me. What's the next flight out? And that trip, it was to Isfahan. So I had connections in Isfahan. And so I spent 4 or 5, 6 days there. And I spent all my money down to about, I think about $6. I had about $6. After I bought a plane ticket for $20 or $25. So I arrived in Shiraz at 9:30 at night, and I told the taxi driver on the way, Pool Nadaram, I don't have any money to speak of. And I told him how much I had, okay. So he took me to one hotel. It was locked up. Shiraz tends, rolls up his sidewalks early. Another one was closed. Another one didn't have any room. And finally he took me to a hotel, and he just left me off at the front door and took my money and was done with it and left me there. So it was a pretty steep flight of stairs, and at the top of the flight of stairs was, kind of mysterious. How do you have a hotel that has where you have these 30 steps as you go up to the reception desk? But it was a little bit of a forewarning. Up at the reception desk was a man, and next to him was his bug spray can, which he immediately, as he spoke to me, and he spoke some English. He spoke some broken English, and he really was quite fascinated with it. Aside from trying to do damage to these bugs, it became clear that he was fascinated by them and sort of liked to watch the process of their reaction to this poison and so forth. And he told me, this hotel is not for you. He could speak some English. This hotel is not for you. Don't stay here. It's not for you. He had an old style switchboard, so I said, well, find a hotel that is for me, can you? And he couldn't, and so in the end he accepted me. And he took me to a room several floors up. The next door there were some Arab gentlemen playing poker, and they were bored and wanting someone else to join them. But I wasn't in a good financial shape to play cards with them. Just wanted to sleep, and it wasn't the best night's rest, but you do the best you can. So in the morning I went down to the desk, and the same man was there with the same can of bug spray. And I said to him that I needed a towel. I'd walked around. There were no showers or baths on the floors, but I found a shower up in the roof. But I couldn't find any towels. So I said I needed a towel, and he said, towel? I don't know towel. And, how do you make yourself known? And so I thought, so I acted out pantomime, a shower, alb, water, and then turning off the water and then stepping out and going over here and picking up towel. He got it. And he said, oh, towel. He says, yes, towel. Oh, if you see towel, tell to towel hello from me. But I actually did finally find one, and it was Friday. I then realized, oh my gosh, it's Friday. Their holy day. I could have no money all day long. I actually had maybe, I had a couple of tumens left. And so I walked all the way from the hotel to the bazaar, about 1.5 miles. I bought a dast of bread. The word dast is hand in Farsi. It's about this big. He said, no, you can live on it for a day. And walked down. The bazaar was open, but very quiet. I walked down the main corridor. I turned into the corridor where Haji Rahim Poor had his shop. There was Haji doing some work on a rug. We greeted each other, and I said, to him, Haji Pool Nadaran. Haji, I don't have any money. He just turned around and walked back. Got a couple of 100 tumans, handed it to me as if it didn't need to be counted, but of course it did need to be counted. And the next day I wired back to the U.S. and got back on my feet financially, and it was one of my most rewarding trips. But as I say, my wife has taught me a different kind of trekking. So thank you very much for that. I got into the rug business accidentally. I was a school teacher and was interested in Persian architecture. For some reason I stumbled onto a book of Persian architecture in a bookstore in Berkeley, California, where I lived, and I could not believe the appeal of these books. It was the sort of thing where a friend would come and visit, and I would open this book and insist that they look at these pictures and expect them to feel what I did. It took me a while to realize, it just doesn't quite work that way. Something had hit me which wasn't going to hit them. So I had a summer vacation. I went to Iran. I had kind of a destination of going to Shiraz. Bought a car in Europe, traveled across Europe and Turkey. I'm not sure. I don't know if I was aware at the time that you might just fly to Tehran and save yourself a lot of trouble. But in any case, drove hither and yon and finally made my way down to Shiraz. And it was a little bit like there was a string connecting me to a man who dealt in the bazaar there. I bought a number of things from him. I bought things in Tehran. I bought things in Hamadan. All very interesting. I didn't know much, and so it was mostly about price, usually not paying over $35 for things. Got back to the United States, and the point here is, decorated my apartment with all of these objects, and then a few months later it was robbed, and the thieves were interested only in the Oriental rugs, and the trappings, and the bags, and all of the kind of tribal stuff that already fascinated me deeply. They took every thread of it. And this was the luckiest thing that ever happened to me. I wrote to this dealer in Shiraz. I wrote in English. I don't write Persian, and I speak very, very little Persian. Enough to bargain and get fed and so forth. His prices were really good. There was hardly any bargaining with him, and no need for it. And so I wrote to him and had photos of the things that I'd lost. And I said, here are all these things that I bought, many of them from you.